Every second you spend watching this video, about $70,000 is added to America's debt. Yes, you heard that right. Every single second. As of today, the total has surpassed $36 trillion. That means roughly $4,500 of debt for every single person on Earth.
The national debt is out of control.
It's going to explode. Look at the interest.
The projections are terrifying. We need cuts.
Higher rates, inflation, a global crisis.
So will this debt actually explode one day? And an even more critical question, is the dollar's status as the world's currency at risk? In this video, we'll connect all three: debt, the dollar, and the Fed's invisible power. America's debt is not just a recent phenomenon, it is the result of a long history. In the 1980s, this figure was only $1 trillion. It increased rapidly after the 2008 financial crisis. Trillions of dollars were spent to bail out banks and keep the economy afloat. In 2020, with the pandemic, the debt virtually exploded. The debt added in just 2 years rivaled what had been accumulated over the previous 20 years. So, where does this money come from? Actually, the mechanism is simple. Every year, the U.S. government collects less in taxes than it spends. To close the gap, it sells treasury bonds, in other words, government debt securities. Who buys these bonds? The vast majority are purchased by American investment funds, banks, insurance companies, and pension funds, but a significant portion is also bought by foreign countries. Japan and China historically rank among the largest foreign buyers. So, why is this concerning? Because now, even just to pay the interest on the debt, taking on new debt is required. In recent years, the U.S. has come to spend more just on debt interest than on its entire defense budget. Economists call this a debt spiral. You borrow to pay interest, and as you borrow, your interest burden grows.
Borrowing in one's own currency. The United States borrows in dollars, reducing exchange rate risk. Argentina and Greece borrow in foreign currencies, exposing them to risk.
But there is a critical distinction here: America borrows in its own currency. This is fundamentally different from the situation of countries like Argentina or Greece. Because, theoretically, the U.S. can print more dollars to pay off its debt. But is there no price to pay for this? There is, and the name of that price, as we will see shortly, is the slow erosion of the dollar's power. This is where the true power of it emerges. The vast majority of the world's central bank reserves, approximately 58%, are still held in dollars. Oil, gold, and many global commodities are still priced in dollars. The bulk of international trade is conducted in dollars. This gives America an incredible advantage that no other country possesses. Economists call this the exorbitant privilege. Thanks to this privilege, the U.S. can do something other countries never can. It can borrow in a way that seems almost unlimited. Because the world still trusts the dollar and wants to hold dollar-denominated assets and conduct trade in dollars. In times of crisis, a country's central bank immediately reaches for the dollar. This trust is the dollar's greatest asset. But is this picture changing? Slowly but steadily, yes. In recent years, BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the newly joined nations have been trying to reduce the use of the dollar in their trade with one another. This is called dollarization. Following the sanctions imposed on Russia, many countries began to ask the question, what happens if the dollar is used as a weapon against us one day? China is steadily increasing its gold reserves. Some countries are attempting to use local currencies in bilateral trade agreements. Yet, let's be realistic, there is no strong, ready-to-use alternative to replace the dollar at the moment. The euro is managed by many different countries rather than a single economic union, and it remains fragmented. As for the yuan, it is still not considered fully reliable by global investors due to China's capital controls and lack of transparency. But even the erosion of the edges of the dollar's status could weaken America's unlimited borrowing privilege in the long term. And it is right here that the third and most critical player steps in: the Fed. The Fed, or the Federal Reserve of the United States, effectively acts as the control lever of this equation. What happens when it raises interest rates? Borrowing becomes expensive, both for the United States itself and for other countries that hold debt in dollars. Think about it. Many developing countries and companies borrow in dollars because dollar-denominated borrowing is generally cheaper and more accessible. When the Fed raises rates, the debt burden of these countries automatically becomes heavier, with no connection to their own economic policies. This is why a decision made by the Fed at a meeting in Washington can cause the currency of a country thousands of kilometers away to lose value or even lead it into a crisis. Now, let's connect three issues. When the Fed raises rates, the interest cost of the U.S.-owned debt also increases, meaning it accelerates the debt spiral. The Treasury has to pay higher interest every time it sells a new bond. But if the Fed lowers rates, this time the risk of inflation grows and the attractiveness of the dollar.
The Fed faces a balanced tension. Rate hikes increase debt costs. Rate cuts weaken the dollar. This illustrates the trade-offs in monetary policy.
The return it offers to investors may decrease, which could weaken the global demand for the dollar. In other words, the Fed is walking a tightrope. On one hand, it tries to keep the debt manageable, while on the other, it tries to protect the strength and reliability of the dollar. And these two goals often conflict with each other. Raising rates increases debt, lowering rates can weaken the dollar. That is why every Fed meeting makes not just the American economy, but all global markets watch with bated breath. So, what happens if these three things go wrong at the same time? The scenario that some economists are talking about is this: debt continues to grow, the world continues to slowly move away from the dollar, and the FED remains trapped between inflation and recession. This is not a sudden collapse scenario. It would be a scenario of slow power loss, lasting years or even decades. However, it must also be noted that the American economy is still the world's largest, most innovative, and has the deepest capital market. Its strength in sectors like technology, energy, and agriculture continues to counterbalance these risks. In short, this is not a disaster movie scenario, but a real story that needs to be watched closely. Hearing this overview, the immediate conclusion might be, so America is collapsing. But looking at history, it is a more complex story. After World War II, the U.S. debt relative to the size of its economy was even higher than it is today, exceeding 100% of GDP. C. Consumption. All private consumer spending within a country's economy, including durable goods, non-durable goods, and services. I.C. Investment. Business spending on capital equipment, inventories, and research, as well as household spending on new home construction. G.S. Government spending. The sum of government expenditures on final goods and services, including salaries of public servants and infrastructure investment. M.A.U.S. Net exports. The value of a country's exports, X, minus the value of its imports, MEM. So, what happened? America did not default on that debt, it grew. The economy expanded rapidly, inflation eroded some of the debt's real value, and over the years the debt-to-GDP ratio gradually declined. In other words, the high debt-to-certain collapse formula has not always held true in history. But there is another side to the coin: Japan. It is one of the developed countries with the highest debt-to-GDP ratio in the world. The figure exceeds 200%, nearly double that of the U.S. Japan has been living with this debt for decades. It hasn't collapsed, but at the same time, its economy has been stagnant for nearly 30 years. Low growth, low inflation, low interest rates, a state of frozen equilibrium. So, which scenario is America closer to? This is where the critical difference emerges. Post-war America had rapid population growth, technological leaps, and production capacity. It grew its way out of debt. Japan, on the other hand, has an aging population and stagnant domestic demand. That is why it cannot grow its way out of debt. America stands somewhere in the middle today. It still possesses the world's most innovative technology ecosystem, but population growth is slowing, and political polarization makes budget discipline difficult. Thus, history does not provide us with a definitive prophecy, but it offers two clear lessons. First, high debt does not automatically lead to immediate collapse. Second, the only way to exit debt is either to grow rapidly or to settle for a long period of stagnation. Which path America chooses is the greatest economic question of the next decade.